The muddy water churned violently around Katherine Lawson's wagon wheels as she desperately tried to keep her panicking horses under control. What had begun as a light spring rain had turned into a torrential downpour within hours, transforming the usually placid Sweetwater Creek into a raging monster that now threatened to swallow her only means of transportation and possibly her children's lives. "Mama, the water's coming in," 8-year-old Timothy cried, his eyes wide with terror as he clutched his 5-year-old sister Emma to his chest. "Hold tight, both of you," Katherine shouted above the roaring water. Her knuckles were white against the rains, her soaked dress clinging to her trembling body as the April rain continued its relentless assault. She had been a widow for nearly a year now, making the journey from Missouri to visit her ailing father in Nevada. The year was 1876, and traveling alone with 2 children across the unforgiving terrain of the western frontier was dangerous enough without nature turning against her. A massive surge lifted the wagon, tilting it precariously. Katherine heard Emma's scream pierce the air as Timothy lost his grip on her. The little girl tumbled toward the edge of the wagon. "Emma," Katherine lunged, but the raging current rocked the wagon again, nearly throwing her from her seat. Her daughter's terrified face disappeared over the side. Before Katherine could even process what was happening, a blur of movement caught her eye. A rider on horseback charged into the churning waters, moving parallel to the wagon. The man, tall and broad-shouldered beneath a rain-soaked hat, had a rope in his hands. With expert precision, he swung the lariat and cast it toward the wagon. The loop settled perfectly around Emma's small body just as she was about to be swept away by the current. With a powerful tug, the stranger pulled her safely into his arms. "Got her," he called out, his voice deep and steady despite the chaos surrounding them. The boy next. Timothy was frozen in place, his eyes locked on the stranger who had just saved his sister. "Timothy, you need to let the man help you." Katherine screamed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The stranger maneuvered his horse closer to the wagon, which was now tilting dangerously as the water continued to rise. With Emma secured in one arm, he swung the lasso again. This time, Timothy, though terrified, raised his arms as the loop descended around him. With a swift pull, the boy was yanked from the wagon and into relative safety. "Lady, you're next," the man shouted, his eyes steel blue beneath the shadow of his hat fixed on Katherine. She shook her head frantically. "My belongings, everything we own is in this wagon. The wagon's lost. Your life ain't." The stranger's voice cut through the storm like a knife. "Trust me or die here." Katherine hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. The man guided his horse as close as he could, Emma and Timothy clinging to him like burrs, and prepared his rope once more. Just as he cast it toward her, the wagon lurched violently. The horses, finally breaking free of their harnesses, were swept away by the current with panicked whinnies. The wooden structure began to splinter beneath Katherine's feet. The lasso settled around her waist, and she gripped it with both hands. "Now!" she screamed, and felt herself yanked from the wagon just as it collapsed into the raging torrent. For a terrifying moment, Katherine was underwater, the cold shocking her system. Then she felt herself being pulled upward, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp. The stranger dragged her toward his horse, his strength seemingly limitless as he fought against the current. "Hold on to me," he commanded as he hoisted her up behind him on the horse. Katherine wrapped her arms tightly around his solid waist, feeling her children pressed between them. The powerful horse struggled against the current, but eventually made it to higher ground. Once they reached safety, the man didn't stop, pushing his mount further uphill until they were well away from the flooding river. Finally, he reined in beneath the shelter of a towering pine. Rain still poured around them, but the immediate danger had passed. Katherine slid from the horse on shaking legs, helping her children down after her. "My name's Lucas Taylor," the man said, removing his hat to reveal damp, sandy brown hair and a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in its rugged way. "Ranch hand at the Triple Crown, about 5 miles east of here." "Katherine Lawson," she replied, her voice trembling as she pulled her children close. "These are my children, Timothy and Emma. You saved our lives, Mr. Taylor." Lucas nodded, his expression solemn. "What brings you folks out in this weather? Don't you know better than to cross Sweetwater when it's raining?" "We're passing through to Nevada. My father is ill," Katherine explained. "The rain wasn't this bad when we started this morning. It came on so suddenly." Lucas glanced back toward the flood. "Well, madam, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but your wagon and horses are gone. And from the looks of things, whatever you had packed in there is halfway to Texas by now." Katherine's knees nearly buckled as the full weight of their situation hit her. "Everything," she whispered. "Everything we had was in that wagon." Lucas studied her for a moment before sighing. "Can't leave you and the little ones out here. Triple Crown's the nearest place with proper shelter." "Mrs. Henderson, she owns the ranch. She's a kind woman. She'll help you figure things out." Katherine looked up at him, rain dripping from her bonnet. "I don't know how I can ever repay you, Mr. Taylor." Something in his eyes softened. "Staying alive is payment enough, madam. Now, let's get you folks somewhere dry before you catch your death." Lucas helped them back onto his horse, positioning Emma in front of him, Timothy behind, and Katherine at the rear, her arms encircling her son and her fingers inadvertently touching Lucas's back for stability. As they rode through the rain toward the Triple Crown Ranch, Katherine tried not to think about everything they'd just lost. Instead, she focused on the broad, solid back of the man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her children first and then her. The Triple Crown Ranch loomed into view after a long, cold ride. Katherine had never seen anything quite like it. The main house was an impressive 2-story structure with a wide, covered porch stretching across its front. Several outbuildings, including a bunkhouse, stables, and a cookhouse, were arranged in a neat semicircle. Despite the ongoing rain, the place hummed with activity as ranch hands tended to livestock and secured equipment against the storm. Lucas guided his horse directly to the main house, calling out as they approached. "Mrs. Henderson, got some folks here who need help." The front door swung open, and a woman in her 50s appeared. Though silver streaked her dark hair, there was nothing frail about Sophia Henderson. She took one look at the bedraggled group on Lucas's horse and began issuing commands like a general. "Lucas, get them inside immediately. Mabel," she called over her shoulder to an unseen person. "Prepare hot baths and find some dry clothes, and put on a pot of stew." Lucas helped Katherine and the children dismount, and they were quickly ushered into the warmth of the house. Katherine's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak as Mrs. Henderson led them to a sitting room where a fire blazed in the hearth. "Poor dears, you're soaked to the bone," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice softening as she wrapped blankets around the children. "Lucas, what happened?" "Found them at Sweetwater Crossing. River took their wagon, horses, everything," Lucas explained, removing his wet hat and coat. "Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. "Good heavens! You're fortunate Lucas found you when he did. Sweetwater's claimed its share of lives over the years." Katherine nodded, clutching her blanket tighter. "We owe him our lives. I don't know what we're going to do now. Everything we owned." "Hush now, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "That's a worry for tomorrow. Tonight you'll have warm baths, dry clothes, hot food, and safe beds. The rest can wait until morning." True to her word, within the hour, Katherine and her children had been bathed and dressed in borrowed clothing. Emma was swimming in a nightgown that had belonged to Mrs. Henderson's granddaughter, while Timothy wore a shirt that hung past his knees. Katherine herself had been given a simple cotton dress that was slightly too large but clean and dry. When they gathered in the dining room, a hearty beef stew was waiting, along with fresh bread and apple cider. Lucas joined them, now wearing dry clothes himself, his hair still damp from his own wash-up. Katherine couldn't help noticing how different he looked away from the danger of the river. His eyes were a deeper blue than she'd initially thought, and there was a gentleness to his expression that contrasted with the strength he displayed earlier. "Mr. Taylor," Timothy said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen over the table. "How did you know how to throw that rope so good? You got Emma and me right away." Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Been working cattle since I was not much older than you, son. A cowboy who can't handle a lasso ain't much use on a ranch. Will you teach me?" Timothy asked eagerly. "Timothy," Katherine admonished gently, "Mr. Taylor has done more than enough for us already." Lucas waved her concern away. "It's no trouble, madam. Boy should know how to handle a rope, might come in handy someday." He turned to Timothy. "Tell you what, if your ma doesn't mind you staying here a spell, I'll show you a thing or two." Katherine's cheeks flushed. "I'm afraid we can't impose on Mrs. Henderson's hospitality for long. We need to continue to Nevada as soon as possible." Mrs. Henderson set down her spoon with a decisive clink. "Katherine, may I call you Katherine? You've just lost everything. Your wagon, your supplies, even your horses. How exactly do you plan to reach Nevada?" I haven't thought that far ahead," Katherine admitted. "Pyramid City's stagecoach only comes through once a week," Lucas added. "And that's assuming you have money for tickets." Katherine's shoulders slumped. The small pouch of coins she'd kept tucked in her bodice was all that remained of their possessions. It wouldn't be enough for 3 stagecoach tickets to Nevada. Mrs. Henderson reached across the table to pat Katherine's hand. "My dear, I've been running this ranch alone since my husband passed 5 years ago. I know what it is to face unexpected challenges. You and your children are welcome to stay here until you sort things out." "I couldn't possibly." "I won't hear of it," Mrs. Henderson interrupted. "Besides, spring roundup is about to begin. I could use an extra pair of hands in the house while my ranch hands are busy with the cattle." "Can you cook?" "Yes, very well," Katherine replied. "Then it's settled. You'll help Mabel in the kitchen and with the housekeeping, and you and your children will have a roof over your heads and food in your bellies while you decide your next move." Katherine glanced at her children. Emma was nearly asleep in her chair, exhausted from the day's trauma. Timothy was watching Lucas with undisguised admiration. She thought of their near-death experience, of everything they had lost, and of the long journey still ahead of them. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Your kindness is overwhelming. Call me Sophia, dear, and thank Lucas. If he hadn't been checking the creek crossings on my orders, you might not be sitting here now." Katherine's eyes met Lucas's across the table. "Thank you again, Mr. Taylor," he nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Just doing my job, madam." Later that night, after the children had been tucked into a comfortable bed in one of the guest rooms, Katherine stood by the window, watching the rain continue to fall. The events of the day replayed in her mind: the terror of the rising water, the loss of their wagon, the miraculous appearance of Lucas Taylor. She shuddered to think what might have happened if he hadn't come along when he did. A soft knock at the door drew her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Lucas standing there, holding something in his hands. "Sorry to disturb you, Mrs. Lawson, but I thought the little ones might want these." He held out 2 small wooden figures, a horse and a cowboy. Carved them myself during the winter evenings. Helps pass the time. Katherine accepted the figures, touched by the gesture. They're beautiful. The children will love them. Lucas shifted his weight, seeming almost shy now that his heroic actions were behind him. Mrs. Henderson mentioned you're heading to Nevada to see your father. Yes, he's been ill. My husband died last year, and with father's health failing, I thought it best to go to him. We sold our small farm in Missouri and packed everything we had in that wagon. Her voice caught. And now it's all gone. Lucas's expression grew serious. Mrs. Lawson, I don't mean to pry, but the journey to Nevada ain't easy, especially for a woman alone with 2 young ones. Even with money for the stagecoach, there's dangers aplenty. I'm aware of the risks, Mr. Taylor, but what choice do I have? My father is all the family we have left. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Just wanted to say that Triple Crown's a good place. Mrs. Henderson's fair and kind. Your boy seems interested in ranch life, and little Emma's already won over the cook. If you decided to stay on longer than planned, it wouldn't be the worst idea. Katherine studied him, trying to read the meaning behind his words. Are you suggesting we abandon our plans to reach Nevada? Not abandon. Maybe. Delay. At least until you've saved enough for a safer passage, or until your father's health improves. He hesitated. I could teach Timothy about horses and ropes like he wants. Boy needs a man's guidance at his age. The offer hung in the air between them. Katherine was acutely aware that this man was still essentially a stranger, despite having saved their lives. Yet there was something about Lucas Taylor that inspired trust. I'll think about it, she said finally. Thank you for the figures and for everything you did today. Lucas tipped his head in acknowledgement. Good night, Mrs. Lawson. Good night, Mr. Taylor. After he left, Katherine placed the wooden figures on the nightstand beside her sleeping children and returned to the window. The rain had finally stopped, and a few stars were beginning to peek through breaks in the clouds. Perhaps Lucas was right. Perhaps they should delay their journey. The Triple Crown Ranch seemed like a safe harbor after the day's harrowing events. She would write to her father tomorrow, explaining what had happened. For now, she was simply grateful that her children were alive and safe, thanks to a cowboy with a well-thrown lasso and eyes the color of a summer sky. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as though the previous day's storm had never happened. Katherine woke to find both her children already missing from their shared room. Panicked for a moment, she quickly dressed in the borrowed clothes and hurried downstairs. The sound of childish laughter led her to the kitchen, where she found Emma perched on a stool beside the cook, Mabel, helping to knead bread dough. The round-faced woman was guiding the little girl's hands with gentle patience. Look, Mama, Emma called when she spotted Katherine. I'm making bread, so I see, Katherine replied with a smile of relief. Where's your brother? Outside with Mr. Lucas, Mabel answered, wiping flour from her hands. That boy was up at the crack of dawn, eager as a puppy to see the horses. Mr. Lucas took him to the stables after breakfast. She shook her head with a fond smile. Never seen Lucas take to a child so quick. Usually keeps to himself, that one. Katherine moved to the kitchen window and peered out. In a small corral near the stables, she could see Lucas demonstrating how to coil a rope while Timothy watched with rapt attention. Even from this distance, she could see her son's face shining with excitement. He's good with the boy, Sophia Henderson commented, entering the kitchen with a basket of eggs. Lucas has always had a way with children, though we don't see many around here. He mentioned teaching Timothy about horses and ropes, Katherine said, watching as Lucas placed the coiled rope in her son's hands and guided him through a simple throw. Lucas is the best horse trainer and roper in 3 counties, Sophia said with pride. Been with me since he was 17. That's nearly 10 years now. His father worked this ranch before him until the consumption took him. Katherine turned from the window. You've been very kind to us, Mrs. Henderson, Sophia. I wish there was some way to repay you properly. Nonsense. As I said last night, I can use the help. Spring roundup keeps the men busy from dawn till dusk, and Mabel and I aren't as young as we used to be. Sophia set down her basket and fixed Katherine with a direct gaze. Besides, I've been watching Lucas this morning. That boy's been alone too long. Having your family here might be good for him too. Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. I'm a widow with 2 children and nothing to my name. I'm hardly what a young man like Mr. Taylor would be looking for. Sophia's eyes twinkled. Don't be so sure. Lucas has turned down plenty of eager young ladies from town. Says he's waiting for something real. She patted Katherine's arm. Now, how about helping Mabel with lunch? The men will be hungry when they come in. For the next week, Katherine fell into the rhythm of life at Triple Crown Ranch. She helped Mabel with meals and kept the main house tidy. Emma became the cook's little shadow, learning to make simple treats and helping to gather eggs each morning. Timothy spent every moment he could with Lucas, soaking up knowledge about horses, cattle, and ranch work like a sponge. Katherine had written to her father, explaining their situation and promising to continue the journey as soon as possible. While waiting for a reply, she found herself watching Lucas more than she cared to admit. There was something compelling about the quiet cowboy. He spoke little but observed much, and when he did talk, people listened. The other ranch hands clearly respected him, and Sophia treated him almost like a son. One evening, about 10 days after their arrival, Katherine was hanging laundry in the yard when Lucas approached, leading a gentle-looking mare. "Evening, Mrs. Lawson," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "Thought you might like to meet Daisy here." "She's beautiful," Katherine said, reaching out to stroke the horse's velvety nose. "She's yours if you want her," Lucas said, his expression unreadable. Katherine's hand froze. "Mine? I don't understand. Been training her for Mrs. Henderson to sell, but she suggested Daisy might serve you better. Said to consider it payment for your help around the house." "But I couldn't possibly. You'll need a horse eventually," Lucas interrupted gently. "Whether you stay or continue to Nevada, Daisy's gentle but strong. Could carry you and Emma together, no problem." Katherine studied the mare, noting her kind eyes and sturdy build. "Does this mean you're expecting us to leave soon?" A flicker of something disappointment crossed Lucas's face. "Not expecting, just preparing." "You still aim to reach your father, don't you?" "Yes, of course," Katherine replied quickly, though she realized with a start that the urgency she'd felt before had somehow diminished. The Triple Crown had begun to feel comfortable, almost like home. "Timothy's a natural with horses," Lucas continued, stroking Daisy's neck. "Boy could make a fine cowhand someday." "He's certainly taken to ranch life," Katherine agreed. "I've never seen him so happy." Lucas seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "Mrs. Lawson, Katherine, I don't mean to overstep, but I've been thinking about your situation. Triple Crown's doing well, but Mrs. Henderson could use help managing the business side of things. She mentioned you handled the accounts on your farm in Missouri." "Yes, my husband trusted me with the bookkeeping." "She could use someone with those skills. Might be a more permanent position than just helping in the kitchen, enough to support you and the children comfortably." Katherine was stunned by the suggestion. "Are you saying we could stay?" "Permanently, if you wanted to," Lucas said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "Timothy and Emma have settled in well. And you? Well, you fit here, Katherine." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. Before she could respond, Timothy came running from the direction of the bunkhouse. "Ma, Mr. Lucas, come quick. A letter came from Grandpa," he shouted, waving a paper in his hand. Katherine took the letter with trembling fingers. It had been forwarded from the last town they'd passed through before the flood. Breaking the seal, she read quickly, her expression shifting from hope to concern. "What is it?" Lucas asked quietly. "My father. His condition has worsened. The doctor doesn't think he'll last the summer." She looked up, torn between conflicting duties. "I need to go to him, but how can I possibly make the journey now?" Lucas was silent for a moment, thinking. "The cattle drive to Carson City starts in 2 weeks. I could escort you and the children from there to your father's place. It would be safer than traveling alone, and Carson City's a fair bit closer to where you're headed." "You would do that?" Katherine asked, surprised by the offer. "I would," he confirmed, his expression serious. "Mrs. Henderson could spare me for a week or 2 after the drive." Katherine felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with another emotion she wasn't quite ready to name. "Thank you, Lucas. You've been so kind to us already." He ducked his head slightly, seeming almost embarrassed. "Just doing what's right, Katherine." He handed Daisy's reins to her. "Why don't you take her for a ride tomorrow? Get used to her before the journey." As Lucas walked away, Timothy looked up at his mother with hopeful eyes. "Does this mean we're staying until the cattle drive? Mr. Lucas said he'd teach me to ride properly if we stayed long enough." Katherine ruffled her son's hair. "Yes, we're staying a bit longer, and it seems you'll be getting those riding lessons after all." That night, Katherine sat on the edge of her bed, the letter from her father in one hand and the wooden horse Lucas had carved in the other. The thought of leaving Triple Crown filled her with an unexpected sadness. In just a short time, the ranch had become a haven for her and the children. Timothy was flourishing under Lucas's guidance, and Emma had never been so chatty and confident. And then there was Lucas himself. Katherine couldn't deny the way her heart quickened when he was near, or how she found herself looking for him whenever she stepped outside. It had been over a year since Robert died, and she'd never expected to feel this way about another man. Especially not so soon, and not a man as different from her scholarly, methodical husband as the quiet, capable cowboy. "It's just gratitude," she whispered to herself. "Nothing more." But as she placed the carved horse carefully on the nightstand, Katherine knew she was lying to herself. The question was, what would she do about it? The next morning, Lucas was waiting with Daisy saddled and ready when Katherine finished her kitchen duties. "Thought you might like that ride we talked about," he said, his usually solemn face brightening when he saw her. "Mabel's watching Emma and Timothy's helping the farrier. We could ride out to Willow Creek if you're up for it." Katherine hesitated only briefly. "That sounds lovely. I haven't ridden just for pleasure in a very long time." Lucas helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent a flutter through her stomach that had nothing to do with the prospect of riding. They rode at a leisurely pace, Lucas pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the ranch and its surroundings. Katherine was surprised to discover how articulate he could be when talking about things he cared about. His knowledge of the land, its history, and its wildlife was impressive. "How did you come to work at Triple Crown?" she asked as they followed a game trail through a stand of aspens. "My pa worked for old Mr. Henderson since before I was born," Lucas replied. "Ma died when I was 6, so I grew up right here on the ranch. Went to school in town when weather permitted, but mostly learned from Pa and Mr. Henderson." "Sophia mentioned your father passed away from consumption." Lucas nodded, his expression momentarily shadowed. 10 years ago. I was 17. Mrs. Henderson kept me on, said I had a way with the horses that reminded her of Pa. Been here ever since." "You never thought of having your own place?" Katherine asked, Been saving for it, he admitted. Got my eye on a small spread about 20 miles north of here. Nothing fancy, but good water, decent grazing. Might be ready to make an offer in another year or two. The idea of Lucas leaving Triple Crown gave Katherine an unexpected pang of regret. You'd leave Mrs. Henderson after all these years. She knows my plans, encourages them even. Says a man needs his own place eventually. He glanced at her, then quickly away. A place for a family. The implication hung in the air between them. Katherine felt her cheeks warm and was grateful when they emerged from the trees to find themselves at the edge of a small, clear creek lined with willow trees. Willow Creek, Lucas announced, dismounting and helping Katherine down. Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. Thought we might rest the horses here a bit. They sat on sun-warmed rocks by the water's edge, watching as their horses drank from the clear stream. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine. "This is beautiful," Katherine said softly. "I can see why you love it here." "Been all over Colorado, Wyoming, even down to Texas once, but there's something special about this part of Nevada," Lucas replied. "The way the mountains rise up against the sky, the way the light changes from morning to evening, it gets into your blood. I never expected to find such beauty here. When Robert, my husband, died, I felt so lost. Coming to my father seemed the only sensible choice, but now I wonder." She trailed off, unsure how to express the conflicting emotions she felt. "What do you wonder?" Lucas prompted gently. Katherine met his gaze. "I wonder if sometimes life takes unexpected turns for a reason. If losing our wagon in that flood might have been a blessing in disguise. Because it brought you to Triple Crown. Because it brought us to people who have shown such kindness. To a place where my children are thriving." She paused. "To you." Lucas's eyes darkened slightly at her words. He reached out, his calloused fingers lightly touching the back of her hand. "Katherine, I'm not a man of many words, but I want you to know something. When I saw you in that wagon, with the river rising and your children in danger, something happened to me. I've never moved so fast or felt so scared in all my life." "You saved us," Katherine said softly. "And ever since, I've been wondering what it would be like if you stayed. Not just at Triple Crown, but—" He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "With me, near me at least." Katherine's heart raced. "Lucas, I know it's too soon," he rushed on. "You're still grieving your husband, still focused on reaching your father, and you hardly know me. But I thought you should know that I care. About you and those children, more than I expected to." The sincerity in his eyes took her breath away. Before she could respond, a distant roll of thunder caught their attention. Dark clouds were gathering over the mountains to the west. "We should head back," Lucas said, getting to his feet. "Storms come up fast this time of year." The moment broken, Katherine allowed him to help her up. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The thunder grew closer, but they reached the safety of the stables just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Lucas helped Katherine dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. "Katherine, about what I said, Lucas." One of the ranch hands burst into the stable, breathless. "Mrs. Henderson needs you at the house right away. Riders just came in from Pyramid City with news about rustlers hitting the Peterson place last night. Took nearly half their herd." Lucas's expression immediately shifted from tenderness to concern. "Tell her I'm coming." He turned back to Katherine. "I'm sorry. Go," she urged him. "We can talk later." As Lucas hurried toward the main house, Katherine led Daisy to her stall and began unsaddling her. The peaceful moment by the creek seemed suddenly distant, overshadowed by the reminder of the dangers that were part of life in this rugged country. For the next several days, the Triple Crown was in a state of heightened vigilance. Extra men were assigned to night watch over the herds, and everyone was on alert for signs of the rustlers. Lucas was often gone from dawn until well after dark, checking fence lines and organizing the other hands. Katherine threw herself into her duties at the main house, trying not to worry about Lucas or to dwell too much on what he'd said at the creek. Instead, she focused on preparing for their eventual journey to her father. She mended clothes, helped Mabel put up preserves, and spent time with the children, especially Timothy, who was devastated at the thought of leaving the ranch and his new mentor. "Why can't we just stay here, Ma?" he asked one evening as she tucked him into bed. "I like it here. Emma likes it too." "We need to see Grandpa," Katherine reminded him gently. "He's very ill, Timothy. But after that, could we come back?" His young face was so hopeful it made her heart ache. "I don't know, sweetheart, we'll see." The truth was, Katherine herself was increasingly torn. Her duty to her father was clear, but the thought of leaving Triple Crown, of leaving Lucas, filled her with a sense of loss she hadn't expected. Almost 2 weeks after their arrival at the ranch, the Triple Crown hands finally caught the rustlers, a small gang of men who had been moving stolen cattle through a remote mountain pass. Lucas returned from the confrontation with a gash on his forehead but otherwise unharmed, much to Katherine's relief. That evening after dinner, Lucas found Katherine on the front porch of the main house, watching as twilight settled over the ranch. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Please do," she replied, making room for him on the bench. Lucas sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him but not so close as to be improper. "Cattle drive starts day after tomorrow," he said after a moment. "I know. The children and I will be ready." Lucas nodded, his profile strong in the fading light. "Katherine, I've been thinking about what I said at the creek, and I want you to know I meant it. All of it. But I also understand you have obligations to your father, and I respect that. Lucas, please let me finish. I've spoken with Mrs. Henderson, and she's agreed to this plan if you are. After we reach your father's place, I'll return to Triple Crown for the rest of the season. But come fall, after the harvest, I could come back for you and the children if you wanted. If your father—" He paused delicately. "If he's passed on by then," Katherine finished for him, her voice soft but steady. "Yes. And if you find that you could care for me as I've come to care for you, we could return to Triple Crown together. Or, if you prefer, I could use my savings to secure that land I told you about. Start fresh, the four of us." Katherine stared at him, overwhelmed by the offer. "Lucas, are you asking?" "I'm asking if you could see a future with me," he said simply. "Not right away, I know it's too soon, but someday." Katherine thought of her brief marriage to Robert, a good, kind man who had given her 2 beautiful children, but with whom she had never felt the kind of connection she already sensed with Lucas. She thought of how naturally he had stepped into the role of protector and guide to her children, how Timothy's eyes lit up whenever Lucas entered a room, how even little Emma had taken to calling him Mr. Lucas in a tone of pure adoration. "I think I could," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I already do." Lucas's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers. "That's all I needed to hear," he said, his voice rough with emotion. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the night sky, their linked hands a promise of possibilities to come. The next day was filled with preparations for the cattle drive. The ranch was bustling with activity as men checked equipment, sorted cattle, and loaded supply wagons. Katherine kept the children close, helping where she could while also packing their few belongings for the journey ahead. In the afternoon, Sophia Henderson called Katherine into her study, a cozy room lined with books and adorned with mementos from the Henderson family's long history in Nevada. "Sit down, my dear," the older woman said warmly, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I wanted to speak with you privately before tomorrow's departure." Katherine sat, smoothing her borrowed dress nervously. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," Sophia assured her. "Quite the opposite, in fact. Lucas has spoken to me about his intentions toward you and the children." Katherine felt her cheeks flush. "He has, indeed, and I couldn't be more pleased. Lucas is like a son to me, and I've worried about him being alone. He needs a family of his own." Sophia leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I know you must go to your father, Katherine. Family obligations are sacred. But I want you to know that there will always be a place for you here at Triple Crown, whether as Lucas's wife or simply as a valued member of our extended family." "You're very kind," Katherine said, touched by the woman's words. "It's not kindness, my dear. It's practicality. You have skills this ranch needs, and your children bring life to a place that's seen too little of it lately." Sophia opened a drawer in her desk and removed a small leather pouch. "I want you to have this." She slid the pouch across the desk. Katherine hesitated before taking it, surprised by its weight. "Open it," Sophia encouraged. Inside, Katherine found several gold coins, enough to ensure comfortable travel for herself and the children, with plenty left over. "I can't accept this," she protested. "You can and you will," Sophia said firmly. "Consider it an advance on your wages for when you return, because I believe you will return, Katherine. I've seen how you look at Lucas and how he looks at you." Katherine closed the pouch, deeply moved by the older woman's generosity. "Thank you, Sophia, for everything you've done for us." "Just promise me one thing," Sophia said, her eyes twinkling. "When you and Lucas marry, and I'm quite certain you will have the ceremony here at Triple Crown, I've always wanted to see a wedding on this ranch." Katherine laughed, surprised by the older woman's certainty but warmed by it as well. "If that day comes, I promise we will." The morning of the cattle drive dawned clear and cool. The ranch yard was chaotic, with men on horseback, dogs barking, and cattle being herded into position. Katherine and the children were to travel in one of the supply wagons until they reached Carson City, at which point Lucas would accompany them the rest of the way to her father's home in Genoa, about 20 miles south. Lucas found Katherine checking their few possessions in the back of the wagon. "All set?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness she'd never heard from him before. "Yes, I think so," she replied, turning to face him. In the early morning light, with his hat pushed back on his head and his blue eyes intent on her face, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. "Katherine," he began, then hesitated. "Before we leave, I wanted to give you something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. She unwrapped it carefully to find a beautifully carved wooden heart, polished to a warm glow. A delicate K was engraved on one side, an L on the other. "I made it last night," Lucas explained, his usually steady hands fidgeting with the brim of his hat. "Not much, I know, but I wanted you to have something to remind you of my feelings while you're with your father." Katherine closed her hand around the wooden heart, deeply touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful, Lucas. I'll treasure it." Before she could say more, Timothy and Emma came running up, excited about the journey ahead. The moment between Katherine and Lucas was interrupted, but the wooden heart remained warm in her hand, a tangible symbol of promises yet to be fulfilled. The cattle drive was a noisy, dusty affair, with over 1,000 head of cattle being moved across the Nevada landscape toward Carson City. Katherine and the children traveled in relative comfort in the wagon, though the constant noise of the cattle and the ever-present dust made for challenging conditions. Each evening, when the herd was settled for the night, Lucas would find time to sit with Katherine and the children, sharing stories or teaching Timothy more about the ways of cowboys and cattle. Sometimes, after the children were asleep, Katherine and Lucas would sit a little apart from the others, talking quietly about their pasts and their hopes for the future. It was during these conversations that Katherine learned more about the quiet cowboy who had saved her family. How he taught himself to read using Mrs. Henderson's books during long winter evenings. How he dreamed of breeding horses one day. How he still missed his father but found comfort in knowing he'd made the man proud. In turn, Katherine shared stories of her life with Robert, their courtship, their struggles on the Missouri farm, the illness that had taken him too soon. Lucas listened with a patience and understanding that made her feel truly heard, perhaps for the first time since becoming a widow. On the 5th day of the journey, they reached Carson City. While the ranch hands remained with the herd to negotiate the sale of the cattle, Lucas, Katherine, and the children prepared for the final leg of their journey to Genoa. They departed the following morning, traveling in a rented buggy through the picturesque Carson Valley. By late afternoon, they could see the small settlement of Genoa nestled against the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Katherine's father, William Lewis, lived in a modest cabin on the outskirts of town. As they approached, Katherine felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. She hadn't seen her father in nearly 3 years, and his letters had become increasingly infrequent and brief as his health declined. The cabin appeared well-maintained but quiet. Too quiet. Katherine's heart raced as Lucas helped her down from the buggy. "Wait here with the children," she said softly. "Let me go in first." The door was unlocked, as was common in small communities where neighbors looked out for one another. Katherine entered the dim interior, calling out tentatively, "Father, it's Katherine." No response greeted her. Moving through the small front room, she found the bedroom door ajar. Inside, her father lay in bed, his thin frame barely making a mound beneath the blankets. "Father," she whispered, approaching cautiously. William Lewis's eyes flickered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Katherine, is it really you, girl?" "Yes, Father, I've come, just as I promised." She knelt beside the bed, taking his frail hand in hers. Up close, she could see how the illness had ravaged him. His once robust frame was skeletal, his skin papery and pale. "The children?" he asked weakly. "Outside with a friend. I'll bring them in shortly. How are you feeling?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Dying, if you want the truth. But better for seeing you." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "I didn't think you'd make it in time." "We had some trouble on the way," Katherine admitted. "Lost our wagon crossing Sweetwater Creek. If it hadn't been for Lucas." "Lucas?" Her father's eyebrows rose slightly. "He saved us, Father. He's a cowboy from Triple Crown Ranch. He's the one who brought us here safely." William studied his daughter's face. "More than a rescuer from the look in your eyes." Katherine blushed but didn't deny it. "It's too soon to say." "But yes, perhaps someday." Her father nodded slowly. "Good. Didn't want to leave this world knowing you were alone." He closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength. "Bring in my grandchildren and this Lucas fellow. I want to meet the man who saved my family." Katherine went to the door and beckoned to Lucas and the children. They entered quietly, Timothy and Emma approaching their grandfather's bedside with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "My, how you've grown," William said, his voice strengthening slightly at the sight of them. "Timothy, you're the spitting image of your father. And Emma, pretty as a picture." The children relaxed somewhat at their grandfather's warm greeting. After a few minutes of gentle conversation, Katherine suggested they help the neighbor, Mrs. Fletcher, prepare some supper. Once they had left the room, William turned his attention to Lucas, who stood respectfully near the door. "So you're the man who pulled my daughter and grandchildren from a flooding river," he said, assessing Lucas with keen eyes that belied his weakened state. "Yes, sir," Lucas replied simply. "Fortunate I was checking the crossings that day. Fortunate indeed." William gestured for Lucas to come closer. "Katherine tells me you're a cowboy at Triple Crown Ranch." "Yes, sir, been there most of my life." William nodded thoughtfully. "And your intentions toward my daughter, father?" Katherine protested, embarrassed by the direct question. Lucas, however, seemed unruffled. "Honorable, sir. I care deeply for Katherine and the children. When the time is right, if she'll have me, I intend to make them my family." William held Lucas's gaze for a long moment before nodding with satisfaction. "Good answer, young man. Katherine was always the sensible one. If she thinks well of you, that's good enough for me." The conversation turned to practical matters, then William's condition, his affairs, the small estate he would leave behind. Throughout it all, Lucas remained at Katherine's side, a steady presence offering quiet support. That evening, after the children were asleep in the cabin's small second bedroom, Katherine sat on the porch with Lucas, watching as stars appeared in the clear Nevada sky. "Your father's a strong man," Lucas observed, "holding on despite everything." "He's always been stubborn," Katherine agreed, a sad smile touching her lips. "The doctor in town says it could be days or weeks. There's no way to know." Lucas took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I'll need to return to Triple Crown soon. Mrs. Henderson will be expecting me back after the cattle sale." "I know." Katherine's heart ached at the thought of his departure. "But I meant what I said, Katherine. When fall comes, I'll be back for you and the children. If—" He paused delicately. "If father has passed," she finished for him. "And if that's still what I want." "Is it?" he asked quietly. "What you want?" Katherine looked up at him, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly yet had already become so important to her. "Yes," she said simply. "It is." Lucas's expression softened. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer. When his lips met hers, Katherine felt a sense of rightness that surprised her with its intensity. The kiss was gentle and brief, but it sealed a promise between them more binding than any words could have done. The next morning, Lucas prepared to depart. He would rejoin the Triple Crown hands in Carson City before making the journey back to the ranch. Katherine and the children stood in front of the cabin to bid him farewell. "Remember your promise," Timothy said solemnly, shaking Lucas's hand as he'd been taught. "Which one, partner?" Lucas asked, crouching to the boy's level. "To teach me to rope a calf when we come back to the ranch." Lucas smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's a promise I won't forget." Emma hugged Lucas's legs. "Bye, Mr. Lucas. Bring Daisy when you come back." "I will, little lady," he assured her, gently patting her back. Finally, he turned to Katherine. In the morning light, with her hair catching the sun and her eyes bright with unshed tears, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. 3 months, he said softly. "By then, the summer work will be done. I'll come for you, whether to bring you back to Triple Crown or to start fresh somewhere else. Whatever you decide." "I'll be waiting," she promised. Lucas kissed her once more, a lingering touch that spoke of reluctance to part and eagerness to return. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, turning once to tip his hat to the woman and children who had so unexpectedly become the center of his world. Katherine watched until he disappeared from sight, the wooden heart he'd carved warm in her pocket where she'd kept it since he'd given it to her. Then she turned back to the cabin, to her father and children, to the duties that would fill her days until Lucas returned. William Lewis passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after Katherine's arrival. He had rallied enough in his final days to spend quality time with his grandchildren, and to have several private conversations with Katherine about her future. "That Lucas is a good man," he told her the day before he died. "Don't let grief or obligation keep you from happiness, daughter. Life's too short and too precious for that." After the funeral, Katherine settled into managing her father's affairs. The cabin and small plot of land were now hers, along with a modest sum her father had saved. Combined with the money Sophia Henderson had given her, Katherine found herself in a more secure position than she had been since Robert's death. As summer progressed into early fall, Katherine received regular letters from Lucas. He wrote of life at Triple Crown, of Daisy and the other horses, of how Timothy's room in the bunkhouse was being kept ready for him. He never pressured her for a decision about their future, but simply reaffirmed his feelings and his intention to come for her when the harvest was done. Katherine wrote back, sharing news of Genoa and the children's activities. Emma had started helping in the local general store a few afternoons each week, charming the proprietor and customers alike. Timothy had found a mentor in the town blacksmith, who was teaching him basic skills with metal. In her letters, Katherine found herself increasingly referring to Triple Crown as home, and to Lucas with an affection she no longer tried to disguise. By the time September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the aspen trees, she had made her decision. On a crisp October morning, Katherine stood in front of her father's cabin, now watching as a familiar figure on horseback approached from the direction of Carson City. Her heart leapt at the sight of Lucas, just as she'd known it would. He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat as he approached. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, drinking in the changes 3 months had wrought. Lucas appeared broader, his skin more deeply tanned from the summer sun. Katherine knew she herself looked different too, healthier, more at peace. "You came," she said simply. "I promised I would." His blue eyes searched her face. "Have you decided, Katherine, where your future lies?" In answer, she stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "With you, Lucas, wherever that may be." The joy that transformed his face was all the confirmation she needed that she'd made the right choice. Lucas gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made her laugh out loud. "I love you, Katherine Lawson," he said when he finally set her down. "Have since I first saw you fighting that river to save your children." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling right and true. "I think perhaps I began to that very same day when you lassoed my children to safety first." Their kiss was interrupted by excited shouts as Timothy and Emma came running from the neighbor's house where they'd been playing. "Mr. Lucas, you're back," Timothy called, launching himself at the cowboy. Lucas caught the boy easily, swinging him around before setting him down and kneeling to hug Emma too. "I told you I'd come back, didn't I? A cowboy always keeps his word." "Did you bring Daisy?" Emma asked eagerly. "She's waiting for you at Triple Crown," Lucas assured her, "along with a surprise or two." "Are we really going back there?" Timothy asked, looking between Lucas and his mother. Katherine nodded, her heart full as she watched her children with the man she loved. "Yes, we're going home to Triple Crown, and this time we're staying." "For good?" Emma asked. Lucas glanced at Katherine, a question in his eyes. She nodded, giving him permission to share their plans. "For good," Lucas confirmed, his arm slipping around Katherine's waist. "Your ma has agreed to marry me, which means you two are stuck with me from now on." The children's whoops of joy echoed through the clear mountain air, a joyful soundtrack to the beginning of their new life together. 2 weeks later, on a perfect autumn day with the aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Nevada sky, Katherine Lawson became Catherine Taylor in a simple ceremony on the front porch of Triple Crown Ranch. Sophia Henderson, beaming with satisfaction, hosted the celebration, which was attended by all the ranch hands and many friends from Pyramid City. Timothy stood proudly beside Lucas, wearing his first pair of real cowboy boots. Emma scattered wildflower petals along the porch steps and couldn't stop touching the new doll Lucas had carved for her, a wedding gift that had instantly become her most treasured possession. As the newlyweds shared their first dance in the ranch yard with lanterns glowing against the gathering twilight, Lucas pulled Catherine close and whispered in her ear, "Remember that day at Sweetwater Crossing? When I first saw you, how could I forget?" she replied, leaning into his embrace. "You saved us." "No," Lucas said, his blue eyes serious as they held hers. "You saved me. I was just existing before you came along, now I'm living." Catherine touched his cheek gently. "We saved each other then." As they continued to dance beneath the stars, surrounded by their children and their new extended family, Catherine thought of the long, unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a near tragedy at a flooded river crossing had led to the greatest happiness she had ever known. The river had been rising around her wagon that day, threatening everything she held dear. But a cowboy had lassoed her children to safety first, and in doing so, had captured her heart as well. 5 years later, on a warm spring morning much like the one when they had first met, Lucas and Catherine stood on the front porch of their own ranch house, watching as their children raced across the yard. In addition to Timothy, now 13, and Emma, 10, they had been blessed with twin boys, William and Robert, who at 3 years old were already showing signs of becoming fine horsemen like their father. The Spring Valley Ranch, as they had named it, was smaller than Triple Crown but thriving under their joint management. Lucas's skill with horses had attracted buyers from as far away as San Francisco, while Catherine's careful bookkeeping and business acumen ensured their financial stability. They still visited Triple Crown regularly. Sophia Henderson, though slowing down, remained a vibrant force in their lives, a beloved grandmother figure to all 4 children and a trusted advisor to Lucas and Catherine. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years since that day at Sweetwater Crossing," Lucas said, his arm around Catherine's shoulders as they watched Timothy teach Emma the finer points of roping a practice dummy. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Catherine replied, leaning into his embrace. "Other times it seems like we've always been together." Lucas kissed the top of her head, his love for her only deepened by the passing years. "Best day of my life, even if I didn't know it then. Because you saved us." "Because I found you," he corrected gently. "All of you." From the corral, Daisy, now retired from riding duties, but still very much a part of the family, whinnied softly, as if in agreement. Timothy successfully demonstrated a perfect throw of the lasso, while Emma clapped in appreciation. The twins, not wanting to be left out, toddled toward their older siblings, their small boots raising puffs of dust in the yard. "Mama, Papa, look," William called, his cherubic face alight with excitement. "Timmy's gonna teach us to rope too." Lucas chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way Catherine had always loved. "Not yet, buckaroo. You're still a mite small for that lasso." "But someday?" Robert asked, his expression a perfect mirror of his twins' hopeful gaze. "Someday," Catherine assured them. "Just like your father taught Timothy." As the family gathered together in the yard, the morning sun warming their faces and their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Nevada sky, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The river had been rising around her wagon, threatening to take everything. But a cowboy had lassoed her children to safety first, and in so doing, had given her a second chance at love, at family, at happiness. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. It was everything.